Here we are at chapter 19. Grimsdale Wood loomed there, no other word for it. The trees here were taller, darker, and more closely packed. The shadows under them were dense and impenetrable. The wood was brooding and dark and seemed determined to conceal its secrets from strangers. The sentry had been right, he thought. He didn't know it when he saw it. He walked slowly along the edge of the trees, clicking his fingers once to bring the dog back beside him. Her ears were pricked, he realized, and her eyes swept from him to the woods and back again, as she sensed where his attention was focused. Then her hackles went up and she growled softly, her gaze riveted to one side. Will looked in that direction, but for the moment saw nothing through the tangle of trees and undergrowth. Then he dropped into a crouch and for a moment saw a faint red glow moving among the shadows. Just for a moment, then it was gone. He felt the hairs rising on the back of his neck as he stood erect once more. He shook his head and laughed softly. It's a light, he told himself, nothing more, nothing less. The dog growled again, and this time Will saw the movement from the corner of his eye, a blue glow this time that seemed to flare briefly in the tops of the trees and then was gone. By the time he had his full gaze on it, it had disappeared. He wasn't even sure that he had seen anything, but the dog's behavior confirmed that he had. Then the red glow was back once more and gone again before he could focus on it clearly. This time it was in a part of the woods several hundred meters from where it had first appeared. Will felt his heart beating faster and his hands dropped to the sax knife once more. Come on, girl, he said to the dog. There must be a path into this wood somewhere. He found one some 30 meters further along. It was narrow and twisting, with barely enough room for one man. Perhaps it was a game trail, he thought, or perhaps it had been made by man. Either way, he went forward into the wood, the dog moving a pace or two ahead of him, head down, nose to the ground. After 20 paces, he looked behind him and could no longer see the way out of the woods. The path twisted so much, and the undergrowth and creepers and trees twined together so closely that his world had become confined to a space of a few meters. It continued on, his hands still on his sax knife. A sax knife helped. Years of ranger training meant that he moved with virtually no sound, and now he began instinctively to use the shadow patterns as cover for his movement. There was no further sign of lights among the trees. Perhaps he thought the light bearers had been scared off when he entered the woods. The thought made him feel a little more relaxed. Perhaps he wasn't the only one in this woods feeling nervous. He smiled at the thought and moved on. Then the whispering started. It was right at the limit of hearing, so that at first he wasn't totally sure he could actually hear anything. Then he thought that perhaps it was the wind through the leaves, except there was no movement, no wind. It was an almost imperceptible susurration that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. He looked at the dog. She had stopped, one forepaw raised, head cocked to one side, listening. So the sound was there, but it was impossible to determine where it came from, and that made it impossible to make out whether it was voices or just a sound. It ebbed and flowed at the very edge of his senses, sometimes drowned by the accelerated sound of his own heartbeat, sometimes becoming almost clear, almost comprehensible, and then in the middle of the indeterminate muttering, he began to make out individual words, unpleasantly evocative words. Once he thought he clearly heard a voice say pain, and then the muttering died until he heard the word, or thought he almost heard it, death and suffering, darkness and terror. Then more meaningless words whispering. He looked at the dog again. She remained alert as before, but the actual words, of course, held no meaning for her. She was reacting only to the sounds. His mind went back to the terror he had felt years before when he and Holt and Gillen were hunting the evil Kalkara beasts across the solitary plains. Then, as now, the terror of unknown sounds had seized him and threatened to overwhelm him. But then he'd had the reassuring presence of Holt to quell his fears. Now he had only himself. He took a deep breath. The sax knife made a soft hiss as it slid from its oiled scabbard, and he said clearly and firmly to the shadows around him, "Steel." The whispering stopped. The dog looked at him. Her tail wagged once, her hackles lowered, and he felt better. Face your fears, Holt had always taught him, and more often than not they will fade like mist in the sunshine. Whispering and words were one thing, he thought. The razor-sharp, heavy sex knife was another altogether, more practical, more real, more compelling, and altogether more dangerous. Lead on, dog, let's find these whisperers. He gestured for the animal to continue. He followed a few steps behind her, confident in her ability to sense danger. It was as well he let her lead, otherwise he might have walked straight into the black waters of the mere that suddenly appeared as they rounded a bend. The path skirted its edge to the right, set among the trees. It was an expanse of black water 30 meters across all its edges. The trees trailed creepers into the water and leaned over to meet each other, some so tall they had nearly touched hands with their opposite neighbors, so that there was clear sky only above the center of the lake. Vapor rose from the water's surface, twisting in wreaths of fine mist that dissipated as it rose in the trees, and bubbles broke the surface where rotting vegetation lay below, or where some large creature breathed, he thought. On the far side of the water, opposite where he stood, the mist seemed to be thicker, forming what was almost a curtain. He stopped to study the phenomenon, wondering why the mist should be thicker in that one spot. The dog sank to her belly, watching him intently, ready to move off if he started walking again. Then, in a heart-stopping moment of absolute terror, a giant figure loomed out of the mist, towering high above the mere, seeming to rise from the black water itself. It happened as quickly as that. One moment there was nothing, then, in the blink of an eye, the figure was there, fully formed, huge and menacing, black against the mist, a shadow figure of a giant warrior in ancient spiked armor, with a massive winged helmet on its head. It must have been 12 meters high, he thought, as he stood rooted to the spot in terror. The helmet was a full face design, but where the eyebrows pierced it, there was empty space. The figure seemed to shiver slightly, and for one ghastly moment he thought it was moving towards him. Then he realized it was simply the movement of the mist curtain. His heart hammered inside his ribs, and his mouth was dry with fear. This was no mortal figure, he knew. This was something from the other side, from the dark world of sorcery and spells. Instinctively he knew that none of his weapons could harm it. The figure towered, unmoving, apart from the slight quivering of the mist. The empty eyebrows seemed to seek him out. Then he heard the voice. It was deep and seemed to echo around the black lake as if he were hearing it in some vast cavern rather than the open woods. "Beware, mortal," he boomed. "Do not awaken the shade of the night warrior. Leave this place now while you are still able." The dog sprang to her feet as the sound of the massive voice. A growl rumbled in her throat, and Will quietened her in a voice that was nowhere near steady. "Still, girl," he croaked, and the growling stopped, but he could see the ruff around her neck raised in a primeval reaction of either anger or fear. He could feel the hairs of his own neck standing on end in the same way. Across the lake, the mist seemed to thicken, and the terrifying figure seemed to grow more and more substantial, as if it were drawing power from the mist. This time, when it spoke, the voice was even louder than before. "Go now, while I grant you the chance. Leave." The final word echoed around the mere, and Will found himself involuntarily moving back the way he had come, stepping away from the black mere and the hellish warrior. He stumbled on a tree root, looked down to recover himself, and then, as he looked up, the night warrior was gone, just like that, in an instant, like a candle extinguished. He glanced fearfully around the mere, wondering if the warrior might reappear somewhere closer. Then the voice came again. It was low this time, nowhere near the volume of the original, and this time there were no words, just a deep, menacing chuckle, a sound that said its author knew his fear and knew its own power over him. The dog growled again, and Will's last reserves of courage left him. "Come on, girl," he called her. Turning, he ran blindly back out of Grimsdale Wood, the dog slipping past him to lead the way to where they could see the clear night sky and the brilliant stars overhead. Only then did Will stop running. His breath came in ragged clouds of steam, and the old in the cold while his heart thumped at double time. He waited several minutes until his breathing settled to a more natural rhythm, but it would be some time before his heart rate settled, he knew. When they came in sight, the black bulk of Castle Mackendale seemed welcoming and comforting to him. The torch burning by the postern gate was a beacon of safety, and he hurried towards it, anxious to be inside the walls. Alright, I'd like to thank you for listening to read up to chapter 19. If you'd like to listen to read chapter 20, then please stay posted, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.